A pastor's wife takes on a powerful bishop in court, but what she uncovers is far worse than anyone imagined. A church built on lies, a pastor trapped between love and loyalty, and a woman who risks everything to expose a secret that could cost her life. Stay with me, because this story will shake your soul. Deborah adjusted her black blazer, took one last look at herself in the mirror, and smiled. She had built a life she was proud of, an accomplished lawyer and the wife of Pastor Michael, one of the most respected church leaders in the city. Their marriage was admired by many, a union built on love, faith, and mutual respect. Together, they led a thriving congregation, offering guidance to those in need. Matthew, dressed in his neatly pressed navy blue suit, came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "You look beautiful, my love," he said, kissing her temple. "Big case today." Deborah sighed, turning to face him. "Yes. It's a sensitive one, a divorce case involving a bishop." Matthew's smile faltered, but he quickly masked his concern. "Divorce? That's unexpected." His voice carried an undertone of unease, but he didn't press further. "I'll pray for wisdom for you." As she left for the courthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case might change everything. Deborah sat in her office, carefully reviewing the files on her desk. Bishop Elijah, a prominent figure in the Christian community, was seeking a divorce from his wife of 25 years, Lady Victoria. The allegations were serious: infidelity, emotional abuse, and irreconcilable differences. Deborah had handled complex cases before, but this was different. This was a case that could shake the foundation of the church. When she met Bishop Elijah for the first time, she saw a man weighed down by guilt and frustration. "I never wanted this," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "But I can't live in pretense anymore." Deborah listened, taking notes, but internally, she wrestled with her own beliefs. How could a bishop, a supposed man of God, walk away from his marriage? And how would Michael react when he found out she was handling this case? As the meeting ended, Deborah knew this was only the beginning of a storm that could tear apart everything she held dear. That evening, over dinner, Deborah decided to tell Matthew about the case. She knew he wouldn't be pleased, but honesty had always been their foundation. As she explained the details, Michael's face darkened. "A bishop seeking a divorce?" He set down his fork, his voice laced with disbelief. "Deborah, the church does not support divorce. This case, it's going to cause a scandal." She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I know, Matthew. But my duty as a lawyer is to seek justice, not uphold appearances." Matthew exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. "And what about your duty as a pastor's wife? What message does this send to our congregation?" Deborah felt a pang of guilt, but she refused to back down. "The truth needs to come out, Matthew. If there is abuse or infidelity, should we silence it in the name of religion?" He didn't answer immediately, but his silence spoke volumes. The divide between them had begun. Word spread quickly within the church community. Though Deborah had been discreet, her involvement in Bishop Elijah's case became public knowledge. Church members whispered behind her back, their judgment heavy in their gazes. At Sunday service, she felt the weight of scrutiny as she walked to her seat beside Matthew. Some church elders looked at her with disappointment, while others outright avoided her. Matthew's sermon on that day was passionate, touching on the sanctity of marriage. Though he didn't mention her directly, Deborah felt every word was meant for her. As they drove home, the tension between them was palpable. "Did you mean to humiliate me?" Deborah finally asked. Matthew clenched the steering wheel. "I was preaching the truth, Deborah. If that convicts you, maybe you should reconsider your choices." She turned away, staring out the window. The battle lines had been drawn. Deborah met Lady Victoria in a quiet cafe, sensing the woman's hesitation. She was elegant but carried an air of sadness, her eyes dull from years of pain. "I stayed because I believed in my vows," Victoria admitted, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "But faith shouldn't mean suffering. Elijah, he hasn't been faithful for years." Deborah's heart ached at the confession. "Do you have proof?" Victoria nodded. "Bank statements, hotel receipts, even messages. I prayed he would change, but a woman can only endure so much." As Deborah reviewed the evidence, she realized this case wasn't just about a failing marriage, it was about exposing a hidden truth within the church. And the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. The church elders summoned Matthew for a private meeting. Though she wasn't invited, Deborah knew exactly what it was about. That evening, Matthew came home looking troubled. "They want you to drop the case," he said. Deborah folded her arms. "And what do you want?" Matthew hesitated before sighing. "I want my wife to be on the right side of faith." Her heart clenched. "And what if the right side of faith is standing for justice?" They stared at each other, a chasm growing between them. Bishop Elijah sat in Deborah's office, his hands shaking. "I won't deny it," he confessed. "I've been unfaithful. But my marriage was dead long before I strayed." Deborah took a deep breath. "Then why stay silent all these years?" "Because the church doesn't forgive leaders who fail," he admitted. "They expect perfection, even if it's a lie." Deborah understood now, this case wasn't just about divorce. It was about the hypocrisy within the institution. Matthew knelt in his study, praying fervently. He loved Deborah, but her defiance troubled him. Was he losing her to her profession? Or was she simply seeing truths he wasn't ready to accept? He opened his Bible, searching for answers. But instead of clarity, doubt crept in. For the first time, Matthew questioned if faith alone was enough to hold his marriage together. Deborah received an anonymous message: "Stop digging. Some secrets should remain buried." Her blood ran cold. Was someone trying to silence her? She knew this case was controversial, but she hadn't expected threats. Taking a deep breath, she deleted the message. If anything, this only strengthened her resolve. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Matthew and Deborah barely spoke at home. Their once loving marriage was crumbling under the weight of their differing beliefs. One evening, Matthew finally broke the silence. "Deborah, is this case worth our marriage?" Tears filled her eyes. "Is a lie worth our faith?" They stared at each other, two souls caught between love, faith, and the hard truths neither could ignore. Deborah and Michael barely spoke at home, their once effortless conversations replaced with tense silences. At church, they put on a united front, but behind closed doors, their differences widened the gap between them. Matthew watched Deborah from across the dinner table, his heart heavy. "You're changing," he finally said. Deborah looked up, her fork frozen midair. "No, Matthew. I'm just seeing things clearly." But clarity came at a price. Lady Victoria called Deborah in the middle of the night. "They followed me, Deborah. Someone is watching my house." Deborah sat up, her heart racing. "Are you safe?" Victoria hesitated. "For now. But I don't think they'll stop until I drop this case." Deborah clenched her jaw. "We won't be intimidated." But deep down, she knew they were running out of time. The next Sunday, Matthew was called to an emergency meeting with the church elders. When he returned, his face was pale. "They want you to step down from the women's ministry," he said quietly. Deborah's chest tightened. "They want to punish me." Matthew met her gaze. "They want to protect the church." She shook her head. "No. They want to protect their secrets." Matthew had no response. Deborah met Victoria in a secluded cafe, where the woman slid a small USB drive across the table. This has proof of everything: his affairs, financial records, even names of those involved in the cover-up. Deborah hesitated. Are you sure? Victoria nodded. If I disappear, this truth needs to live on. A chill ran through Deborah. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was survival. Matthew knelt in his study, his hands clenched in prayer. God, I don't understand. Am I wrong, or is she? He wanted to believe he was fighting for righteousness, but a part of him wondered if he was simply afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of the truth. That night, he watched Deborah walk, realizing that maybe she wasn't the one straying from faith. Maybe he was. Deborah was leaving court when a man in a hood shoved her, sending her to the ground. Papers scattered, and before she could react, he whispered, "Drop the case, or next time it won't be a warning." She clenched her fist as he disappeared into the crowd. Fear surged through her, but so did determination. If they thought threats would break her, they underestimated her strength. Bishop Elijah requested a private meeting. When Deborah arrived, he looked weary. "You're relentless, I'll give you that." She folded her arms. Truth demands persistence. He slid an envelope across the table. A generous settlement for Victoria. Just make this go away. Deborah stared at the money, then at him. You think justice is for sale? His smile was cold. Everything has a price. She stood, leaving the money untouched. Not my integrity. Matthew sat across from his church elders, their gazes heavy with expectation. Your wife's actions have made this church vulnerable. You need to control her. Matthew looked at them, his stomach twisting. Or what? The head elder sighed. Or we remove you from leadership. For the first time, Matthew realized he had to choose between protecting his position and standing with his wife. And he wasn't sure which choice terrified him more. As Deborah analyzed the USB drive, her breath hitched. Hidden among the files was something more damning than she expected: evidence linking Bishop Elijah to criminal dealings beyond the church. Fraud, bribery, even connections to shady business ventures. This wasn't just about a corrupt bishop. It was about a system built on lies. And exposing it might put her life in danger. That night, Deborah sat beside Matthew, showing him the evidence. His face drained of color. This isn't just about a divorce case, Matthew. The church is covering for criminals. He exhaled sharply. Deborah, if you go public with this, she met his gaze. I have to. For the first time, Matthew saw not just a lawyer fighting for justice, but a woman willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. And he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to stand beside her. Matthew and Deborah stood at the entrance of their newly established church. The community center had become too small, and now they had rented a modest but welcoming space for worship. As people arrived, Matthew felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Are we ready for this? Deborah smiled, squeezing his hand. We've never been more ready. They had built this place on honesty, and that made all the difference. Not everyone was pleased with their success. Some former church elders, still bitter over the downfall of Bishop Elijah's church, began spreading rumors. They are leading people astray, one elder told a reporter. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. Deborah read the headlines and sighed. They won't stop attacking us. Matthew put an arm around her. Then we'll keep standing. Truth had already won once. It would win again. One day, an older man attended their service and waited to speak to Deborah afterward. I was one of the elders who voted to remove you, he admitted. I believed we were protecting the church. But now, I see we were protecting corruption. Matthew listened, surprised. I was wrong. And if you have me, I'd like to help. Matthew shook his hand. We welcome anyone willing to seek the truth. Victoria returned to town, smiling brighter than Deborah had ever seen her. I'm happier than I've ever been, she said. And I wanted to thank you for standing by me when no one else would. Deborah hugged her. You saved yourself, Victoria. I just helped you see it. For the first time, Victoria was truly free. Their small church was thriving, but Deborah had another idea. We should start an outreach, she told Matthew one evening. For victims of church abuse. People need a safe place to heal. Matthew's eyes lit up. A ministry beyond the pulpit. And just like that, a new mission was born. On their wedding anniversary, Matthew and Deborah sat on their porch, watching the sunset. We almost didn't make it, Matthew mused. Deborah leaned against him. But we did. Their love had been tested, their faith shaken, but they had rebuilt. Not just their marriage, but an entire community. And through it all, their bond had remained unbreakable. The moral lesson of this story teaches us about resilience, truth, and the cost of standing up for justice. Through every challenge, we saw how faith and integrity were tested, but in the end, the truth prevailed. Now, I want to hear from you. What key lesson did you take away from this story, and how can it be applied in real life? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we can't wait to read them.